Well, we're back again, and to answer those questions that I hope that I put forward to Arthur, we're going to ask you again. The great man, John Howard, Pauline Hanson.
Well, look, let's start with John Howard on that.
Yes.
I remember vividly in the 1996 campaign when we had to expel Pauline Hanson from the party.
Yes, Mr. Abbott's work.
With some of the remarks she made about, I think in that case it was Indigenous Australians.
Yep.
And that was a time when, we were, the 96 campaign, some people say it was a small target campaign. It was more a smart target campaign. So we didn't want any distractions. So we didn't want to have to spend 2 or 3 days having to talk about Pauline Hanson as opposed to our policies.
Yep.
But the then Prime Minister's view, John Howard's view, was very much, I'm not going to, once she was in the Parliament, I'm not necessarily going to attack her directly. I'm certainly not going to attack her supporters, people who are voting for her. I'm going to try and understand why people were attracted to Pauline and her message, and how do we make sure that we can bring those voters back.
That's brilliant.
So we never worked on the basis that I'll give you an example, Queensland state election 1998, 25% of people voted for One Nation. I said at a meeting of Chiefs of Staff afterwards, don't assume 25% of Queenslanders are therefore racist because they voted for Pauline Hanson.
Correct.
We got to understand what is underpinning that. Why does she become a convenient vehicle for protest, for grievance? What are the issues that are in people's minds? And so in that period, 96 to 98 or whatever, we worked hard to understand the sort of people that were attracted by One Nation. What was the impact of her? Was it people in lower income seats, regional seats, where traditionally they'd often been National Party supporters, country party supporters? So we worked out policies to address what was actually underpinning the support for her. And then of course when the whole Tampa boat people issue came along, the Prime Minister was very strong on that. We will determine who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come. And that was to send a strong message that we control the immigration policy. And it was interesting because we brought immigration under control and convinced the electorate that we had an orderly immigration program. That then led to the interesting increase you've seen in the program ever since, because people trusted us to be administering the program in Australia's national interest. So we undercut some of the basis of support for her. And the reality about her has always been that whenever she's had a few people in the party, in the Parliament, it's often fallen apart. In Queensland, they won, I think, 11 seats in 1998. By the next election, they'd lost 4 or 5 of those seats. Others in her party had gone off and started their own parties or whatever. And the lesson was she can't necessarily keep it together as an organised force. But what's happened in recent years is it's very clear that people are very concerned about affordability, cost of living, housing, immigration. In their minds, many of these issues have become linked. And she's been very clear and consistent in her message on this. The opposition, the Liberal opposition, has been through 2 devastating defeats in 2022 and 2025. Part of the reason for those defeats is 2022, 9 years in government. We had to do a lot of things during COVID that a lot of our own people didn't agree with. So that alienated part of our base. And then 2025, I think, again, we confused people because on issues like tax cuts and other things, we were saying things the opposite of what we believe on economic management and whatever. We were opposing tax cuts. And on the nuclear stuff, we didn't seem to have the courage of our convictions because we didn't go out there and really argue the case. Yep. So that raised real issues about, how serious are the Liberals in all of this? So the Liberals have faced this situation where we've faced the pressure on the left of the party, which is the Teal pressure in some of our old heartland seats, and on the right we faced the pressure from the sort of Hanson constituency and people saying, well, we want the Liberals to have a clearer message. Because as a governing or potential governing party, we have to have a message which we can't narrowcast. We've got to have a message that potentially encompasses both city seats and country seats. Some people say if we're strong enough on issues like economic management, defence, all the old issues that the Liberal Party was strong enough in the past, that can bring people back. But, none of this is easy. You've got day in and day out, you've got to hold the current government to account, and then you've got to keep building up your own policies about what you'll do with things. I think the Liberal Party can come back because it has a track record of being in government, and that's important. And the National Party, their brand works best as the coalition partner in the bush that can also be in government and bring real benefits to the bush. So there's no easy answer to this. The Liberals have just got to work a way at it. But if they take the view that they try and out Hanson, the problem they'll face is that people will say, well, it's like Smith's crisps. Go for the original and the best. Why would you go for the imitation? So for the Liberals, they've got to be true to their own values as well. And for me, the great example of that is the late, great Senator Ron Boswell in Queensland, who was very much a senator for all of Queensland, had a particular remit for the regions, but he did not, he decided to fight One Nation. He didn't go down the route of, I'll be like One Nation. So he was distinctive. So he tried to appeal to the people who were interested in One Nation, in regional areas and small business and whatever. But he also had a message for people in the cities, that he wouldn't necessarily agree with some of her views on immigrants, for example. And so, he won twice against One Nation, 2001, and he engineered a victory for the Queensland Coalition in 2004. And the victory in 2004 was such that we actually got a majority in the Senate for the first time.
Is this, may I just pop in there, is this what Bob Katter's trying to do? What Boswell did?
Well, Katter's very much his own player.
Yeah.
He's sort of, the thing about Bob is that he's very much a North Queensland product, very hard to transplant elsewhere. Whereas Boswell was able to straddle the divide between city and country. So that's the challenge for the Liberals.
Yeah.
If they can't become too Labor-like and they can't become Hanson-like. They've got to be themselves, go back to what they've traditionally stood for. But that means day in and day out, they've got to focus on just a few basic issues and argue their case.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I met up with Susan Lay when she was running with Peter Dutton. In Griffith, there was a bit of a festival on, and we spoke for about half an hour or so. And I said, what the Liberal Party needs, I said, is someone like Margaret Thatcher. I said, because I knew Dutton was going to lose. I said, you're going to be the next leader. Be like Margaret Thatcher. Oh, no, you don't know Peter. He's a really great guy, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, Peter lost.
Yeah.
And when she took the seat, as she did she become like Margaret Thatcher? No. And I think that was a downfall for her. Because had she shown strength and commitment and conviction, I think people would have seen a difference between her and Albo.
I agree with you. Bringing that up, and this is the perfect gentleman, an advisor. Do you think Susan Lay had bad as her advisor? Because this was the man that helped Mr. Howard stay there.
We spoke to your mate Joran Finkelstein.
Yeah, we had that reprobate.
We love him. We love him.
We had Joran on it
We
last
love
week.
Joran. And,
but how?
And we asked him that question.
Yeah,
didn't we?
the importance of the advisor.
Yeah.
You know.
Look, with someone like John Howard, he was very easy to advise in one sense because he had a strong sense of his own values and ideas. So for him, from his time as Treasurer in the Fraser government, he became convinced Australia needed more market-oriented policies in tax, industrial relations, privatisation, you go through the list. And so that's why in the 80s he got a bit of stick for this. He actually agreed with Labor on certain policies when they were doing what he thought was the right thing. Now some people feel that he actually gave Labor sort of room to move on some of those issues because they could frame him as, he's too right-wing, but we're doing something market-oriented, not as right-wing, and that they had more freedom to do that. But the reality is that even though he may have suffered in the 80s for his convictions, it made people realise conviction politician, he stands up for what he believes, he's prepared to give credit if people are doing the thing that he agrees is the right thing to do. So when Keating wanted to do the GST in 1985, Howard agreed with him. In fact, they were on a plane together once going somewhere and Keating gave him a copy of his tax statement on the GST and autographed it for him because they agreed on the basic principles. And that's why in 1993 Howard was very supportive of John Hewson on doing the GST. But it was interesting then, isn't it, that Keating flipped and in 1993 was saying he no longer supported a GST, whereas Howard was consistent all the way through. And that consistency means that if you advise him, you know the framework he's operating in, you know what he's likely to accept or not accept, but to his great credit, he was always willing to hear bad news. He was always willing to listen to the other point of view, because he wasn't just interested in the people who came up and said, oh, you're doing a great job, yay, yay. When he went to a community function, he was interested in the people who had a gripe, who had some concern. It was like an early warning system. I want to know if there's a problem. And then it was like a monkey on his back. What do I do to get this fixed? So our job was to be a bit of that early warning system. Our job was, when everyone was saying, yay, great job, was what's the contrarian view? What's the potential downside of what we've done? Okay? And he was the sort of person in a meeting with public servants, and not many politicians do this, if he didn't understand something, he would say, I'm sorry, I don't understand that, explain that to me again, because he knew if he didn't understand it, how was he going to explain it when he went out there? And I think that got him the respect of people, because they said, well, this bloke is prepared to... He never acted like he's the smartest person in the room, even though he's obviously extraordinarily gifted, smart, whatever, given the roles that he's achieved, particularly as Prime Minister. And you know, it's the old adage, if you're the smartest person in the room, leave that room. Go to another room.
He was always, to me, I watched John speak many times, along with a man who I loved and still do, Brendan Nelson.
Yes.
Without a note. Brendan could stand up there and talk on the subject he was to speak on, without a note, and John Howard was the same.
And the thing about John Howard is he'd think about a speech beforehand.
Yeah.
But he always felt that it delivered best if he could look you in the eye.
I agree.
As he's giving it.
You bet.
There might be some speeches where he'd have something written that he would say to make sure that people got the right set of words because he was announcing a policy or something like that. But most of the time, he had composed the speech in his head. So by the time he got to the rostrum or the podium, he had a very good idea what he was going to say, and he weaved it all in. And the thing is, you'd then get the speech written up, and it would read like a written speech.
Yes.
Whereas with some of Trump's speeches, you can clearly see, and we saw this during the State of the Union as well, you can see the bits where he's ad-libbed, just by the way he ad-libs. Whereas with John Howard, it was always very composed and structured. And that also came from being a very disciplined person. Like, he was so disciplined. 3 meals a day, get up at the same time of the day, have his walk, vigorous walk, and then at night have dinner at the same time, go to bed at a reasonable hour, start the day again. Every day in the morning, ring home, see how everybody is. I remember him sort of at the end of the week when it was time to go home, he would go home, unlike some pollies who used to stick around. And they're the ones that hung around, they're the ones who got into trouble.
You see him drunk, rolling on the ground in some park.
Exactly.
I just remembered the vision of John Hewson trying to explain the GST cake. To the day I die, I'll remember John.
You see, it was interesting with John Hewson. I know John well, and I haven't seen him for a year or so, but with the cake, I think that was an example where conceptually and economically, he knew all the arguments, but the question was always the practical things. So when we ended up doing the GST in 98, we spent a whole year rehearsing all the arguments. Costello and Howard spent a year looking through all the arguments put up against the GST and what the counter arguments were. And so when they went out there, they were pitch perfect. Costello in particular, I don't think ever put a foot wrong in his interviews on this. Howard, I think on, maybe it was Alan Jones' show, he made a slight mistake on something which then was corrected quickly. But the thing is, they rehearsed it all through, and they understood, you've got to be able to understand what happens to a schooner of beer, what happens to a slab of beer if we go down this route, what happens to petrol, how are we dealing with petrol, etc., etc. They really thought it through. They put in the groundwork, and so even though today people say, oh, you can't do reform, and it's social media and whatever, well, you just got to adapt how you do things, but there's no substitute for advocacy. Got to get out there and just make your case.
And the phrase and term I dislike a lot, I seem to hear more from the Labor Party and Bowen and that group, of modelling. Everything's modelled. The model tells us we're going to do this. And you look at someone saying, you're talking about something a year away or 2 years away. What model is that public servants told you is going to make this?
You can never... The thing is with communication, as you know so well, both of you and you, is it's got to appeal to the emotions, right? Because people will...
And it's got to be truthful.
People will sift the facts, but the facts are hardly the thing that moves your position.
Sure.
Ultimately, it's about emotions. And with the GST, part of it was a lot of people recognised it was a difficult thing to do. So I think for some people, they voted for it on the basis, well, if these guys are prepared to do this, they must think it's good for the country, because it's not good for their political survival necessarily. And we lost seats out of it, but you get my point. In other words, you go out there and you do this because you think it's in the national interest. And if you can convince people of that, you'll get a lot of people on board. So we tried to make sure there were as few losers as possible from the change, through income tax cuts and everything else, but at the same time we appeal to this idea that this is call it for the country.
Well, at the end of the day, people ask themselves, Mr. Government, what's in it for me? Am I going to pay less tax? Am I going to pay less for my power? Am I going to pay less for my food? Am I going to pay less for my fuel? Because if the answer is yes, you've got me. You've got my vote. You know?
Viewers out there, you can see why with the John Howard government, with this fellow sitting not far from Mr. Howard's right hand, why it was such a great government, a solid government, an honest government, I believe. But I'd like to thank Arthur for being with us today. I know Vinny with us as well. Arthur,
can I just ask one more question?
Of course.
You know, an old cop.
He always has to have the last.
No. I'm an old cop, right?
An old cop. Oh, here we go. He's going to get me on the last answer.
No. This is totally off centre. I've got a gripe over the amount of money that is being made by illegal criminals selling illegal cigarettes.
Yes.
The government has lost billions in taxes, yet refuses point blank to bring it back to where it was.
This is a big issue.
Why aren't they changing the law?
And chop and all that sort of stuff. Look, this is a big issue, and it's happened because for a long time we saw increasing the excise on cigarettes as a cost-free policy for government. And everyone did it. We all did it, right? But the reality is now that the excise is so big that it's created a huge incentive for people to try and find ways to bring in the illegal tobacco. So we get it's a version of what happened during Prohibition in the US, right? You prohibit something legally, people will find a way to do it illegally. It's the same here, and that's created this huge chunk of revenue out there that is being exploited
billions
by others who bring in these products. And you're right, it's a ticking time bomb. Look, no one wants to go back to the bad old days and just say there's no excise on cigarettes and people should not worry about cigarettes. There are reasons why we did what we did, but it's one of those areas where if the tax goes too far, it creates the very incentives you're talking about and animates all this other illegal behaviour, which then creates, to your point as an ex-policeman, this ecosystem around it, which feeds into other illegality, right?
Absolutely.
And so this is the problem.
Murder, mayhem, illegal money being transported all over the place for other illegal...
And these underworld groupings now are becoming very sophisticated.
Very sophisticated. Cryptocurrency, you try and follow that blockchain.
Absolutely.
It's impossible.
Well, I think it's another time for another discussion on all this. Hopefully Arthur will join us again.
You've got a big part coming up, haven't you?
I've got to...
No, you're going to go to some rehearsal. He's going to play some role. What's his name? What's the guy's name?
But Arthur, thank you for joining us.
Great to see you.
And please come back. I'm sure our viewers are going to have many questions of you that we will find out. So comment, please. Join us, follow us, troll us.
I'll probably troll you.
But thank you for joining, and thank you, Arthur.
Great.